Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, to borrow the nice quote from the late Christopher Hitchens, welcome. I'm going to be your professor for this lecture series. This is going to be Education 101, not your standard education course, however. I want this to be a very raw, authentic look at the field in education, a nice little overview of things. Things that I wish I would have known when I first went into the field, because it's extremely competitive, and you wouldn't think that until you get into the field. And you know, it's different for every single place, but I want to give you a very raw, authentic look. You know, professors are afraid nowadays to speak their minds, or even worse, they just don't know the field like they used to, right? Because they've been a professor for 30 years. And so these are things that I wish I would have known. I'm not affiliating this with any university or anything, right? So this is going to be a college level course, but you get it for free here on YouTube. It's obviously not for college credit or anything like that. But if you do want to be the most prepared education candidate in the world, right? At least we can say that anyways. Then you're going to want to watch this course. It's going to make you very prepared. It's going to help you get a job, which is very important, right? It's going to help you get a job, as well as be the best practitioner that you can be for the field of education. So today, this is going to be the most boring of the lectures, right? But it's extremely important. It gives you a nice foundation. It's going to be an overview of what we're going to cover in the course, as well as terminology. It's going to be our shortest lecture. We're really just going to, briskly fly through this lecture today. But again, extremely important, right? And you think to yourself, well, why should I care? There's a teacher shortage in the United States. It's like, I don't have to. Who cares? Who cares about this, right? Well. If I read an article from I believe it was The Guardian, don't quote me on that. There was an article and it said how many people who go through a teacher preparation program end up getting a job in the field of education within the first couple years or something like that, right? I gave a guest lecture on this actually at a university, and I opened the class. I was like, well, how many of you guys want a teaching job after you just spent 5 years studying, because it's 5 years on average to get your degree and your teaching license. How many of you guys want to be a full-time teacher in your own classroom, right? They all raise their hand. It's like, well, statistically speaking, it's like only half of you are going to get a job in education. So you can see the panic ensue the room, right? They're losing their minds. But then, you can still feel the nice bravado in the air of the people who are like, come on, I'm in the top half, right? Of course I'll get a job in education. But the thing is, it's like, I wouldn't be so sure about that. Right? I wouldn't be so sure about that, right? Because you're looking at the field of education. I didn't say teachers. I said field of education, right? That's substitute teachers. That's title teachers, right? That's tutors. That's paraprofessionals, right? That's librarians or something, right? That has nothing necessarily to do with being a general classroom teacher. And so, it's very competitive. Again, it depends where you're at. I'm in Ohio, and the job market is absolutely insane. Northeast Ohio, even more crazy. There's lots of teachers' colleges here. And so, again, rural Wyoming, right? Maybe you can get a teaching job right away, right? But if you're in one of these competitive places, you have to be the best that you possibly can. And I'm going to prepare you for that today and throughout these lectures throughout the coming months here. And so this will be a full course. We'll cover a bunch of different things, and we'll get to that today. So the first thing here is education right for you? You can look up on the screen here for the PowerPoint. Is education right for you, right? I personally believe, and again, things are arbitrary, right? This is an anecdote, but for me, it is extremely competitive where we're from in Ohio. And just to give you an example here, you're looking at about 15 teaching positions per year for 7 through 12 social studies, and there's about 400 applicants, right? And let's say about half of those automatically go to somebody through nepotistic means, right? So you know somebody that can help you get in. The other 7 or 8 positions, and that's being nice, those are people who are the best in their field, and they've done the absolute most to get there. So abandon all hope, ye who enter here. If you're not ready to commit yourself to this field, you better just, I don't want to say give up, right? But abandon all hope, ye who enter here. The old saying over the gates of hell, right? There's no hope. And I've seen many people get hopeless, which is one of the sad things about being in this field. And if you want to make a decent living, right, you got to get into a public school, right? So that's the first thing, right? And if you can't get into a public school, and again, these are talking about public school positions, not charter school or private school positions, because you can get one of those, right? But if you want to get into a position where you can get a nice living, salary schedule, union, tenure, Other little benefits, tuition reimbursement, obviously the union protections, lower class sizes, less classes you have to teach in general, less preps where you have to prepare for multiple different classes, right? So you might only prepare for 2 classes as opposed to 5, right? Or have less supervisory duties, or you get compensated for those when you do have to do supervisory duties, such as study hall or lunch duty, for example. So, you want to be the most prepared that you possibly can be. So ban all hope, you who enter here, right? You got to be the most ruthless competitor if you want to, be the one who's getting these jobs. And so, if you're not willing to commit yourself, right, think deeply, right? If this isn't something that you want to commit your life to, at least for the next few years till you can get into these public roles to know if you really, really like it or not, then you should really start to reevaluate things, right? And especially so because, we'll talk about the state of the field here. So this is especially so, right? So extremely competitive. We already talked about that, right? The low pay, right? If you're starting off your career, you might be at a charter school for a couple years, or you might be at a private school for a couple years. And sometimes there might be benefits to those things, for example. For example, I was at one for 2 years, and it was great in terms of the freedom that you had to perform in your role. You had a lot of freedom to sort of do whatever you wanted. You can grow as an individual. Now, some people like that, some people don't. But that is something to certainly take into consideration. But in the same breath, you also get low pay, right? You're not going to be making what these people make in the public schools, right? And even if you get into the public schools too, let's say you're the best of the best, right? You make it there, and obviously there's lots of people who get in, and maybe they're not the best of the best, right? But the pay, for the people who are the best, right? It's a lot lower than you're going to make in the corporate world. And you have to be okay with that, right? Now, there is room for growth, right? You can go be an administrator and make 6 figures, or you can do things on the side, such as being a professor, or do teachers pay teacher, or something along those lines to make more money, have another job. Lots of teachers have second jobs. But you got to be willing to expect that, right? You're not going to be making a lot of money off the bat. Now, you put in your time, right? You put in a lot of years of service, right? You'll make a decent living, right? You will. You'll make a decent living. You'll make $70,000, $80,000 a year. Maybe you stay 25 years, you make $90,000 a year. You got the summers off, right? You're talking about what you love all day. You get to work with the kids, help the next generation. But you got to be willing to expect that these things are going to take time. And so you got to factor that into your livelihood. The next thing here is discipline issues, right? So, just think about it, right? Some of you guys, people who are watching this lecture here, not everybody, right? A lot of you guys probably grew up in some suburban school somewhere. There's very few discipline problems. And when there were, it's like, yeah, you knew about them, right? But there's nothing compared to some of the schools that you will be most likely finding a job at, right? A lot of these inner city, urban schools, they need good teachers, right? But in the same breath, right, it's a very, very stressful position. It is so stressful you almost can't even believe it. I've dealt with absolutely everything that you can possibly think of, right? There's nothing that you can throw at me that I have not seen before in terms of discipline. And I quite literally mean that. I'm talking everything from murder to arson to constant fights. You're looking at threats. It is a rough position. And that's not everybody who's there in these schools, right? And that's certainly, definitely do not take that on context. That's not everybody, right? But having said that, right, it is going to be a stressful position for that. You're going to have lack of compliance, right? So people aren't going to want to just follow your orders, right? Like if you're the manager of somebody too, this is what people oftentimes think. It's like, I heard this is a wonderful quote I heard. It's like, you're not just sitting back at your desk with your feet up, smoking a large cigar. It's like, in the field of education, that wouldn't be the case. Obviously, it's, if you're not just sitting there at your desk, right, having kids do worksheets and they're perfect little angels who sit there being nice and quiet. It's like, they're not going to like you for telling them what to do all the time, right? You have to be willing to work with them, and there's going to be a concept called student-centered learning, which we'll talk about a little bit, and that will sort of counteract that a little bit, but you're going to be dealing with issues all the time, right? All the time, and we'll have a whole lecture devoted to behavior management, discipline, how you can best control your students to essentially foster the most amount of learning, right? So you're going to this is going to be a very high stress position, and imagine this: you're a student, right? And I wanted to throw this in there, the student POV, right? Oftentimes, it isn't how it used to be years ago, right? If you fail a class nowadays, you just get moved on to the next grade. Now, you could quite literally have a 0% in the class, and in the state of Ohio, I believe, if you fail one time, you can fail one time, get held back one time before during K through 3, then you get held back one time from 4 through 12. And after that, they just are going to pass you along, right? Now, if you're a student, right, and you haven't had the life experience yet, you don't know any better, And even though people are telling you this, because your mentors will probably be telling you this as a student, you see that I don't try in class, right? I do what I want in terms of just, messing around with my friends, having fun, having a good time. It's laid back. I don't care about my work. And you go on to the next grade. You're like, I passed to the next grade. Why would I have to do work? Look at all these chumps over here doing all this work, right? They reap no reward from it. They haven't reaped a reward from it for years and years and years and years. But by the time they get to 12th grade and they're not passing those state tests and they're not getting those high school credits towards their diploma, they're going to have a absolutely horrific time trying to get their diploma, if they ever do get their diploma. And then getting into the job market, it's like, when you're 20, or no, let's say when you're 16, these business owners are willing to give you a chance, right? Let's take McDonald's, for example, right? How much do you think it costs to own a McDonald's, right? It's about $2 million that you have to have liquid net worth, right? These people put their hearts and souls into getting that money in the first place, financing it somehow, some way, and they put it into this business. They want to see it succeed, right? So if you're 20, 25, right, you're going to start getting less and less chances as time goes by. Let alone when you're 30, right? It's like people will take a chance on a 16-year-old yet who, maybe you can change and have somewhat of a good employee from, right? But they're not going to take a chance on a 30-year-old or a 25-year-old who doesn't have a diploma, right? They're just not going to do it, right? And why would they, right? Because imagine you got $2 million on the line. You're going to want to see your business go down in flames? No. And so, these things are very crucial to be thinking about, right? It's not necessarily always going to be the most rewarding position. Or will be rewarding, right? But it's a thankless profession in some regards, right? Sometimes you get a lot of thanks, and other times you don't. And part of the reason is it's because you're not going to get it from every student. You will get it from a lot of students. You can make a difference, but it's not going to be the difference that you automatically expect it to be. So that's the first thing, or the last thing. All right, next up here. So what can we expect to be in this course here? We're going to talk about a bunch of different things here, and we might add to this as we go by, but generally speaking, this is probably going to be pretty stagnant. So we got differentiation. We're going to learn what that means. Behavior management, technology, so use of technology in the classroom. We got data-driven instruction. We got assessment. We got effective grading and feedback. Feedback is absolutely vital, right? In the last 30 years, we've probably moved away from just, and what is it, Rick Stiggins is always commenting on this here. You want to move away from just grading and ranking kids based on grades and understanding. You want to give them some feedback so they can grow, right? We got special education, stakeholder involvement / collaboration, lesson planning, famous case studies in the field of education, right? You can think of a million of them. Richard V. Durston, right? Tinker v. Des Moines, right? There's a number of different case studies. IDEA, right? That's going to be a big one that you're going to have to learn about. And then student teaching and the job market. And IDEA is not a case study, but anyways. Student teaching and the job market. And this is going to be the most, so if you guys want to honestly, almost once all the lectures are up, student teaching in the job market, that's going to be the most important lecture. And so if you guys want to stick around for all of this here, I really hope that you do. But student teaching and job market is going to be the absolute most important of the lecture in the series here. So next up here, we're going to talk about common positions and their responsibility, terminology, and importance. And we'll go through briefly on this because we don't want to spend the entire day here just talking about things. When we will cover them more in depth, but we'll give you a little brief explanation, a verbal paragraph per se, on each term as well as the positions here. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good start here. Right around this time, I'd probably pause for any questions, but we're virtual here, so no reason to do so. Well, having said that, we'll start off with the common positions here. So again, now you're probably wondering, why is it important to know these positions, right? Because when I went into the field of education, there are some of these positions that I didn't know what they were. And looking back at it, you don't realize the complexity of the environment that you're going to be in. Because you have to understand the roles of each of these individuals because you can collaborate with them, right? You can give them more of a stake in the child's education. And so one of the things that I study, and I'm doing my dissertation on it, is, or at least planning to do my dissertation on this, is big 5 personality traits and teacher effectiveness, right? Now, personality is a very, very interesting thing, right? So there's a lot of evidence to suggest that most traits are about 50-50, people say, just generally on average, right? 50% heritable, and the rest is due to environmental causes. And so that would be the manifestation of, say, personality traits, for example. So let's take extroversion, right? What is extroversion, right? We all know extroversion, yes? Extroversion is your love for social interaction. You get excited by it. It is also your positive emotion circuitry in the brain, right? So when you are a very extroverted person, you also experience more positive emotion than people who are less extroverted than you. Now, what is the heritability of a trait like that, right? What is the heritability of a trait like that, right? 50-50. That's on average. But as time progresses, this is the interesting thing, as time progresses, that trait will actually go up to as high as 80% heritability, which means that you're essentially born with the personality that you will eventually manifest by the end of your life, right? It's a very, very scary thing to think about, right? Because that means that the environment has less of a impact than you would otherwise expect it to have. So let's just take a brief example here, right? You're one teacher who sees the students one time every single day for 180 days, and then you never see them again, right? You might see them in the school and whatnot, and maybe work with them a little bit, but really you're probably only looking at 180 days, right? So now you take a student who's, say, 15 years old, right? You take the number of days that is, right? You'll take 180 divided by parentheses 15 times 365, right? Because that would be the number of days that they've been alive, right? So that's one factor, right? And you're going to put that all in parentheses. You're going to times that by whatever the personality factor for heritability is, right? So then you'll say, let's just say 0.8, right? Because that's what it's going to be like by the time they get really old, right? Let's say 0.8, right? But we can go with 0.5 or 0.7, 0.6, whatever it is. Let's do 0.5 for argument's sake, right? So you're going to take 0.5, right, times 180 divided by 15 times 365, right? And then you got to times that number, right, by the amount of control that you have over your environment, right? So think about it. Like if I had 100% control over my environment right now, right, I could like lift tables using my mind, right? Everything I wanted to at my whim would be, I could control it, right? I do like some like anime type thing where I'm just like, or like Magneto, right? I can move the table up and down, right? But you can't do that, right? Why? Because you're not a wizard, right? And so you're not a wizard, Harry. So anyways, you have to be willing to think about these things. And so let's take, maybe you got half control over your environment, right? To do whatever you want, whenever you want to. So you take, 0.5 times 180 divided by 365 times 15, and then you put that in parentheses, and then you times that by 0.5, right? And that's going to give you a solid look at how much of an influence, times 1 divided by 24, right? Because you got this amount of hours in a day. You're not going to be with them 180 days of their life, right? You're with them 1 hour every single day. So times 1 divided by 24, and then you get that number, and that's going to be a very, very, very small percentage of the influence that you can make, right? Now, imagine this, though. Imagine that now, instead of, you're just one person, right? And your impact is almost nothing, right? Unless you make it a very, very profound experience for somebody, which can be the case, right? If you make it a very profound experience, something that they value so deeply, you actually can alter their personalities permanently. And, that's one of the things that there's been a decent amount of research in recently with mystical experiences that people have, whether artificially induced or just they just naturally occurring. And so, well, having said that, maybe you're the best teacher in the world and you make a slightly bigger difference. It's like, that's awesome, right? Just in terms of altering the personality to more pro-social behavior, right? So that way they can go into the job market, right? They can, have a nice stable job, right? They can get their mortgage. They can have great relationships with people. They can live a prosperous and happy life. Well, so now you're just one person, right? But now you add up all the other teachers in that year, right? And so now the difference maybe goes in that one factor that we had. Maybe instead of, maybe you can do 8 hours a day for 24 hours, right, of the 180 days that you're with them, right? So now you're having more of an impact, right? And then maybe after that, now you can get the parents involved, right? And maybe the parents can be on your side to foster that pro-social behavior too. So now you're going to add even more time that the kids can get more pro-social reinforcement, right? And then maybe you can add community members into the mix, right? And then you can add them over time, right? So not just in 1 year, for all 13 years of their education. And now all of a sudden you can make a very big difference, right? And the line between antisocial behavior, which leads to criminality, and pro-social behavior is pretty small. You can teeter-totter over it pretty quickly. But it tends to get very rooted in us before we turn about 5, which is one of the reasons why we should be promoting preschool, but that's a whole other conversation. So anyways, having said that here, what are some common positions that we're going to talk about? There's a number of different ones. Again, you want to be engaging with these people. You cannot stress that enough. Again, it's its own lecture, and we will talk about this here, but this is the importance. You have to understand these things. If you don't understand what these positions are, obviously there's no homework. This is all on your own accord, but I would recommend studying what these positions are just so you're familiar with it. You go into an interview, right, and somebody's asked, well, okay, well, how do you collaborate with your intervention specialist? And you're like, what is an intervention specialist, right? How do you collaborate with TESOL, right? And you have no idea what that is. How do you collaborate with a speech pathologist, right? You don't know what that is, you're going to have a very bad time in the interview. You're not going to get the job. So anyways, intervention specialist here. These are the people who are working with special education accommodations and modifications. What is an accommodation and modification, you might be asking? Well, what does their IEP or individualized education plan, what services or what additional services are you providing to these students? How are these monitored, right? How did these come to be in the first place? Who is working with them consistently? You're going to be working with special education students all the time, right? And how are you following their individualized education plan, their IEP? Intervention specialists can be working with them all the time. Really think of special education when you think of intervention specialists, right? TESOL, ELL, these are the people who are working with English language learners. These are the people who are trying to help students who are new to the country, usually, most often, who speak a different language, navigate learning English, right? Especially the content, right? Because, let's say you're a sixth grader, you come into the United States and you only speak Chinese, right? It's like, you're going to have a very difficult time. You might be at a 6th grade level in terms of mathematics and reading and social studies and science, but the chances that you're going to be able to do that, you're going to look like you're on a preschool level because you don't know any English, right? And so these are the people who are going to help those kids learn that, right? And navigate through that. And you're going to help them do that as well as a teacher, but that's going to be solely their job, is to provide a lot of instructions, a lot of vocabulary acquisition. That's going to be a big thing, conjugation and the like. Teacher, it's pretty self-explanatory. They're going to be providing your curriculum instruction the vast majority of the time. Assistant principal, a dean of X, right? So assistant principal, what do they do? An assistant principal is basically somebody who is, they either focus on developing teachers, right? And they work on teacher performance ratings. Usually there's some teacher rubric mandated by the state that somebody's living in, or that the school is present in, or they focus on discipline, and that'll be their primary job. So they're either developing teachers, helping them along with curriculum and instruction, or they are focusing solely on discipline, right? So they're going to be reaching out to the parents, right? They're going to be administering that discipline, and very, very needed position nowadays. Principal, these are the people who are going to be, they got their hand in everything. They got a million different hats, right? These are the people who are going to be, they're overseeing everybody, every single operation in the building. They're going to be focusing a little bit more on budgeting, compliance issues for special education is probably going to be one of their most important tasks. But yeah, the principal, they're going to have their hand in everything. Maybe they come into your classroom as well. They give you a review. But assistant principals oftentimes do that in exchange for the principals, but it can be either one. So yeah, principal. A speech pathologist. What is a speech pathologist? These are the people working with students with speech issues. All right, speech issues could be something like a stutter, for example, or maybe a lisp. Maybe instead of saying, I don't know, Sally, they say shally, right? And so, that's a real thing that people work with. When I was little, I actually had a problem saying my S's, and I only did for a little bit, and I actually practiced it, and I was good. So I never had to go with the speech pathologist, but it was something that I would have had to had I not corrected it myself. And my mom sat down with me, had me practice it a million different times. So, speech pathologist, right? That's a very important job. You want to be able to effectively communicate what you have to. Counselor and social worker. Counselors are extremely extremely important, especially for the troubled youths, right? People who are at risk oftentimes need good counselors and social workers. And one of the distinctions I've oftentimes found between social workers and psychologists is that if you're a counselor, right, oftentimes you had somebody come to you and you're administering psychotherapy or therapy or whatever. But if you're a social worker, you're coming to them, right? So as the social worker may or may not be wanted, right? Maybe the kid wants to be with them, maybe they don't. Now, I feel like most of the time they do want to be with a social worker, at least from my own personal experiences. Again, anecdotal, right? But social workers, they're going to help kids work through their problems, right? And develop mechanisms to cope with various different things, because people's lives are hard. I mean, you have no idea how incredibly difficult some of these students' lives are. And you got to be willing to work with these individuals to help these students along. And so sometimes you might have meetings with them, right? They'll schedule a meeting, and you guys just talk about the student. Maybe you have to sign like an NDA or something, or maybe you don't. It really depends on the situation. But these are people working with the kids to sort of help them through with their issues. Maybe there's a problem at home. Maybe they're facing homelessness, right? Or maybe there's some parent who tends to be a little abusive, or maybe they have a bunch of problems focusing at school. Maybe they're having difficulty with bullies or others, or maybe they are the bully, right? Or maybe they're just not getting along with the teacher for whatever reason, whatever the reason may be. They're not getting along with their siblings. It doesn't matter. But the counselors and social workers are a very vital part of the school. Paraprofessionals, these are going to be people that you see, monitoring lunch duty or something. They're going to be in the hallways. They're going to just be helping. They're just a nice, helpful hand, right? They can sort of do a number of different tasks throughout the school, but they're a little bit different than an aide, because an aide is somebody who oftentimes is working with special education, and or maybe they could be underneath the teacher directly, not like you're their boss kind of, right? The principal is probably going to be their boss, right? But the aide is more so going to be working with curriculum and instruction, so you're helping the student academically, whereas the paraprofessional might be helping them out in non-academic needs, right? So that's the distinction there. Resource officer, it's kind of like, it's just a police officer, but they tend to be a little bit more trained for the youth, right? And so they're not going to just treat you as if you're a hardened criminal, right away. They're going to try to work with you a little bit more, try to de-escalate things a little bit more often. But they're very important to have in the school, a resource officer, because people nowadays are very afraid of having police officers in the school, but it's important, right? Obviously, the whole instance we've been having recently with school shooting threats and the like that's one thing that's absolutely terrible, right? It's disgusting, and so it's important that you have them in the school for that reason. But even farther than that, they have a nice presence in the school, right? And you can always count on them to come to your aid as a teacher. And so that's one very, very important thing. They're kind of like security, and as a teacher, especially as a young teacher, one of your first instincts might be is if somebody gets into a fight, for example, you want to break it up, right? But every single school district in the country pretty much is going to advise against that. And they're not going to protect you. Your union is not going to protect you if you do try to break up a fight, because you're not trained. You're not trained to break up the fight. You could get hurt, or you could hurt the other students, and it's a potential lawsuit. It's a big risk and liability for you to do so. So unless somebody's like you could do it legally, right, and you'd be fine, right? But you really want to stay clear of it as much as you can, right? So you let the resource officer deal with that. Unless somebody's obviously getting stomped out, then of course you're going to want to intervene. But you want to be very careful about doing that. Yeah, it's like the absolute last option unless somebody's about to seriously get hurt. So let them do that. That's their job. They're trained for this, right? Superintendent, these are the people overseeing the entire school district. They're kind of like a local politician when you think about it, like the mayor, but for the schools. So you have the superintendent. They oversee every single school in the district. So if there's 30 schools in the district, they're overseeing all 30 schools. And they're going to work with the policy, the direction of the district, the mission statement, vision, a lot of budgeting, right? That's what they're going to do. Department chair, they're going to be focusing a little bit more on your curriculum. What curriculum are you guys going to use for the upcoming school year? How can we develop teachers in my specific department, right? So let's say you're a social studies department chair. You're going to try to develop these social studies teachers to be the best that they can be. Union representative. If you're a union rep, these are the people that you're going to go to if there's some grievance, right? So maybe say the principals aren't allowing teachers to have their mandated lunch, right? And maybe every single day teachers get a half an hour lunch, right? And that's duty free, so they can do whatever they want during that lunch, so they can just eat their lunch, be free. They don't have to do any duties, right? And it's at a certain time. Well, maybe the principal is like, nah, right? We're taking that lunch away from you. You're just going to work flat out the whole time, right? Well, you go to your union rep, and the union rep's going to be like, excuse me? Right? And they're going to be like, no way is that going to happen. We're going to file a grievance right now, and we're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to get you back pay, and maybe even some for pain and suffering in some cases. But union representative, right? They're looking out for you as your teacher in accordance with your contract. If you're trying to ask them to do something outside of the contract, just forget it, because they're not going to help you on that. But next up, we got the union president. They're going to oversee some of these representatives, and they're also going to be fighting for union contracts and rights moving forward. So what are the new contracts going to look like? Are we going to add new stipulations to teachers? Are we going to lower class sizes? Are we going to add more pay for the salary schedule? What are we going to do? And so union president is going to help out with that a little bit. They're going to fight on your behalf. Athletic director, these are the people who are going to be managing all of these sports in the school. They're going to be working with all the other districts in the conference or schools in the conference, coordinating game times and the like. So a lot of scheduling, transportation. They're going to be working on spirit wear. So they do a number of different things. All the forms and compliance that you have to do to even allow kids, like for example, they need physicals. Sometimes they might need vaccinations. So athletic director is going to oversee all of that. Secretary and office manager, these are very important. They're going to help with the daily operations being ran in the school. And they also might deal a lot with attendance too. So attendance is usually going to be a big responsibility of them. And attendance is a little bit more important, obviously more important than you think, but here's a cool statistic, right? If you miss 2 days per month of school, you've missed 10% of the school year. I believe I have that right. Yeah, 10% of the school year, right? Think about that. Only 2 days per month. It doesn't sound like a lot, right? That's 10% of your school year. So as a student, you should never expect to get above 90% ever, even if you're the best, right? Because you're missing 10% of your school year, right? Think about that. You're missing 10% of your curriculum and instruction. So you want to have the most attendance that we possibly can, and schools get paid based on attendance, right? So it's not enough to have an enrollment. The student actually has to show up to your school, and they're going to get audited on this, right? So they have to be in your class learning in order for you to get paid. And then that funding can be used on a number of different things in the school. So next up, we got custodian and maintenance. They're going to help around the school, fix things that need to be fixed, clean things that need to be cleaned. A very important job. School psychologist. They're going to be oftentimes testing students, right? So for like their IQ, their personalities, they're going to be performing like little tests on them. Maybe what grade level are these students on, and how can we develop a path moving forward for these students to be more successful with an IEP or some other form of accommodation, like a 504 plan or whatnot. Then we got school board members. School board members, very important. They're going to be the people who are, voting on a lot of policy issues in the for the school district. So this will be district-wide is usually where their policies are going to be hitting hardest the most. And they're going to be working alongside the superintendent, right? So superintendent, I would consider them a school board member. Oftentimes they're sitting on the school board, sort of chairing it in some regards, but there's different types of school board members, right? You have different officers, different ranks, but these are going to be elected officials. And so these officials here are going to, really make that local administrative law for your district. So very important that you understand what they do as well. The next up here, we got terminology. Again, we're trying to get through this quick here. We're going to talk about a lot of these things more in depth, but we want to quickly cover them, right? So data-driven instruction, not using data to guide your instruction is the biggest error that a teacher can make, right? Because if the students are not responding to your teaching methods, you have to be able to look at the data, see that they're not responding to it, and then develop a path forward. Usually do some action research or something along those lines to remedy that. So maybe you taught a certain unit one way, everybody bombed the test, right? Now, is it always your fault? No. Sometimes it's not your fault, right? And don't let people tell you otherwise, right? But a lot of the times, if everybody's not responding, you could have probably taught differently or went more in depth, right? You got to be able to look at that data. Formative assessment, summative assessment, we're going to talk about that. So data-driven instruction is extremely important. Response to intervention, we'll talk about this when we get to special education. I've always hated response to intervention. I think it's a fool's gambit. I think it's not something that you want to be using all the time. Essentially this thing here where there's 3 different layers to education. You can imagine a big pyramid, right? And most of the strategies that teachers are going to be using for most people are at the bottom, right, of the pyramid, the first layer. And most students are going to respond positively to that, either behaviorally or academically. Then there's another layer which is a little bit more intensive, the second layer, and then the majority of those students who did not benefit from the first layer, or maybe they did benefit from the first layer, but they weren't responsive to the first layer, will respond to the second layer. And then the third layer is the most intensive, and they're still not responding to that or having very hard difficulties with it. Then we'll look to get them special education services. But it's a way to sort of avoid testing students and getting them special education over a longer period of time. And so I don't understand why schools use this when they could just test students, because it's extremely important that students get their services, right? It's extremely important, right? And mandated by law, I might add. But some places they respect response to intervention, but I've always been against it. But we'll talk about that a little bit. Stakeholders, again, these are your parents, these are your teachers, these are your students, these are your business owners, right? These are your administrators, right? These are your other staff members, stakeholders, everybody involved in the student's education. Differentiation. Differentiation is how can you tailor education to be the most interesting and be the most accommodative to individual students in the classroom, right? And so differentiation essentially means anything, right? And we'll have a whole lecture on this, some notable differentiation methods. But oftentimes differentiation it's basically everything. It's a word that means so much that it almost means nothing, right? It's like nature or nurture. It is so much that it almost means nothing, right? And so, environment. Environment almost means so much that it means nothing. Differentiation it could be a lecture, project-based learning, culturally relevant teaching, inquiry-based learning. There's a lot of different things that you can do to differentiate lessons, make things movies, documentaries, audiobooks, simulations, but these things are dependent on the data and what your students respond to and what they want the best. And you're going to give them some autonomy to decide that. You're also going to decide for them themselves based on the data. And so differentiation, very important here. How you can make education the most interesting and accommodative to every student in your class. Special education, basically how you can provide services for students with disabilities, most often intellectual disabilities, to bring them up to the needs that everybody else needs to get to, right? And so if you have a special education student, the goal is not to have different expectations for them. You have the same expectations for them, but you're going to help them with some additional services to meet those same expectations, right? So that's what special education is. You got individualized education plan. That's just the plan in place for the individual student. Functional behavior assessment. These are basically assessments that you can give students with behavior issues to sort of get to the root of the behavior issue itself, right? So why are students behaving the way they are? And if you know why, then hopefully you can tackle the issue, you can extinguish it from its base. Then we got culturally relevant teaching. This is a way to not necessarily relate things back to the culture of a student, which is what a lot of people will often say. It is more so to relate things in a way that students find most interesting, right? Now that could be their culture, right? If you got a Puerto Rican student, maybe you relate something back to some important, you do a biography on a famous Puerto Rican scientist in a science class, right? That's culturally relevant teaching. Or maybe students, they love baseball, right? So you can tie baseball into some sport. Or if you're talking about friction on the ice rink, right? When people are playing hockey, right? You say, well, why does the puck slide almost endlessly, right? As opposed to stopping on the concrete. Well, because there's less friction, right? So you can relate things, right, back to students' own interest. Inquiry-based instruction is just getting students to think about various questions, get them to question things, and then they can, so first of all, they inquire things about certain topics, right? So you say, why did why did Abraham Lincoln feel compelled to free the slaves, right? Well, that's a nice inquiry-based question, right? And then you're going to have students investigate that, most often with some project-based learning. We got lesson plans, right? So teachers, shockingly enough, most teachers don't actually make lesson plans, and they probably shouldn't because they're very time-consuming. But but they should in the sense that they're informal, right? So very formal lesson plan, you're not making those every day, maybe a few times a year, or you can make them if you really want to, but you don't have to. Lesson plans that are informal, so just a basic breakdown of your procedures for the day, and as long as you know what you're going to be teaching and why you're teaching it, that's your lesson plan. State standards. When you're teaching things in education, every single state has its own standards. And that's most often what's called Common Core standards, but it's different for every state. Most states are Common Core, like 45 of them, but the rest aren't. And so, Common Core, and that'll be for like reading and math. And I think there is a Common Core for science, but I don't think most places use them. And then you got other types of standards that different organizations or maybe nonprofits for that matter, I don't really know, or just the states themselves come up with, right? And you have to follow these standards, and usually they're pretty broad, right? So you can differentiate those standards. There's one of our words there, differentiate the standards yourself, or you can attempt to maybe have a nice map that you find online, right? And then they can tell you exactly what you need to teach, but most of the time they're pretty broad and you decide yourself. That's one of the distinctions between the No Child Left Behind Act, right? So standards were a lot more rigid back when No Child Left Behind was around, and this used to be the overarching federal education law of the land here. No Child Left Behind. It is no longer a thing, actually, like most people tend to think it's still around for some reason, but it's not. No Child Left Behind has been abandoned for quite some time now, almost a decade. And, or at least we're coming up there in a few years, almost a decade. And it is basically a policy that it was, students would, I guess you'd say, you fostered a culture of mediocrity with No Child Left Behind. I think that's the best way to put it, right? No Child Left Behind punished high standards, and as a result of punishing high standards by removing their title funds for not meeting those high standards, schools would set lower standards, right? And their states would set lower standards for the schools to achieve, right? And so the highest performing schools in the state, if they didn't meet their standard, well, they lost funding, right? So they're like, well, screw that. I'm gonna make a standard that isn't as high, and I'm going to go meet that standard so I can get my funding for my schools. And so No Child Left Behind fostered culture of mediocrity, whereas the Every Student Succeed Act does not mandate curriculum, and it's a lot more open-ended, and it doesn't punish these high standards. So, and there's state test scores are not the only thing anymore, as opposed to No Child Left Behind, that schools are rated on. They're also rated on a number of different things, as opposed to just state test. So it's nice. It's a more inclusive look at school performance, right? And that can include something such as graduation rates, for example, right? Or kindergarten readiness, or third grade reading guarantee, or third grade reading level guarantee, right? So you got stuff like that. Behavior/classroom management. This is basically how can you make your students, behave pro-socially in a way that they're not disrupting the learning of themselves or others, right? And so that way they can get learning done in the classroom. Then we got rubric. Rubric is very important because it allows grading to be quantitatively defined, right? So it's explicitly stated. It's less arbitrary. I'm sure you guys have all seen rubrics before. It's like, look, you get 1 point if you do this, you get 2 points if you do this, you get 3 points if you do this, you get 4 points if you do that, right? And maybe there's a comment box too, so you can write out why somebody didn't meet a certain level if it's not clear in the rubric. But it's just a way to make things less biased, because you want to leave out your personal opinion, right? You really want to stick to hard facts about performance, right? So that way it's the same for everybody. You want to show favoritism, right? Then we got assessment. Assessment is how you're going to collect your data. That's either summatively or formatively. And how you collect your data, right? That's assessment, right? That could be a test, right? That could be a bell work, right? That could be a show of hands, right? You're using assessment all the time, a simple walkthrough to see how students are performing, right, or how on task they are. Accommodations would be, this is what's going to be in the IEP, accommodations and modifications, so these two terms up here. And accommodations are really going to be, let's say you obviously want to meet the same standards for everybody, you have the same expectations for everybody, but accommodation might be, well, somebody has a difficulty reading because they got like dyslexia, so maybe they get an extra 30 minutes on every test, right? So, you know, they can still be tested on the same, on their understanding, but they got 30 extra minutes so they can read through it. Modification would be something like, how can you change a test, right? So maybe you have a test with less questions, right? But it's, you know, it's still covering the same content, right? Advanced placement is a type of class which is usually going to grant, is always going to grant you college credit if you pass what's called an AP test. And these are higher level courses, so college level courses at the high school level. So a little bit different than honors class. Honors class is more higher level, faster paced. But advanced placement has the opportunity for you to pass a test and get college credit. And teachers also have to usually be certified to teach advanced placement classes as well, regardless of what degree they have or experience. So Individuals and Disability Education Act, IDEA, this is what's going to give you all the special education law in the country and you know, mandate certain practices. You're going to have at-risk students. So at-risk students are the people who are most at risk of, you know, something like criminality, right? Or you know, maybe suicide or whatever, right? Bad things, right? So you want to try to target these students, and so hopefully you can target them and give them the most help, so that way they don't fall victim to you know, bad things happening. Charter school is a school that they get public fund. They're a private organization that gets public funding to run schools, but they don't get local funding. Career and technical education. Again, we're going to go through these because we don't got much time here. Career and technical education. So these are going to be oftentimes programs that students can take throughout high school in order to give them some career certification or industry credential, maybe, maybe not, or at least some training, so that way they can go to the job market and have a successful career. So like beauty school would be a good example of this, or automotive, one of those. Common Core, this is the curriculum that a lot of schools are going to use, like 45 states use this for reading and math. School culture is going to be the culture that you want to foster in your school. Is it inclusive? Is it a safe culture? Right? Very important. Mission statement. What are you setting out to accomplish as a school? Right? What are you setting out to accomplish? Right? I want to see a student. A good example would be, I don't know, blank city school district wants every student to fulfill their dreams through rigorous civic education, right? And so that way they can help society through voting. Gifted program would be, you know, you got your gifted students here. These are students who are very, well, obviously they're higher level in terms of their academics, and they might be in an honors class or an AP class. Then we got highly qualified teachers. These used to be teachers who were certified to the highest level as a result of No Child Left Behind. It's no longer a thing, but people still talk about them sometimes in job applications. So just know it's no longer a thing unless you were a highly qualified teacher under the No Child Left Behind Act. But technically speaking, you could still meet those requirements. Then you would be considered a highly qualified teacher. And then we got least restrictive environment. This is the environment that students can grow the best in, right? So you want to have students most oftentimes being in the general education classroom as much as possible. And then to the extent which they're not able to be in the least restrictive environment, then you want to put them into a special education classroom, like a resource room or a behavior room. You got International Baccalaureate. This is like a program that students can prepare for college in. It's called IB. They have special curriculum for that, usually pretty standard across countries too. Project-based learning, you're going to use projects to teach your students. And these could be very interesting for students. People are going to love these. They love projects, right? That's going to be one of the main things you should be doing as a teacher. Referrals for special education would be, you know, you refer them to get tested because you think that there might be something intellectually that's holding them back that could maybe be remedied by an individualized education plan. So I'm trying to go fast here, guys. I don't got much time here. Only got the room for a little bit more longer. Scaffolding, so you're going to give students some steps throughout the process and sort of guide them along. Social emotional learning, is going to be the learning to foster their emotional needs and their social needs to get along with others. So you're going to really be focused on pro-social behavior as well as managing emotions. So very important. It's a big new wave to focus on social emotional learning. Multimodal instruction is going to focus on things such as different senses for the students, right? Different modalities. So like touch or sound, right? Or taste or vision, right? And you could do a lot of things. So things that are multimodal tend to be a little bit better, right? So if you can have a book, you're reading a book, you have an audiobook that goes along with it, right? Now, audiobooks actually aren't beneficial unless you have text with them. That's one thing that's pretty clear from the literature. Unless you already have your knowledge base already fostered, or your vocabulary, or you already got a nice vocabulary base. But if you're a student, you might not, especially when you're younger too. So you want to have them reading things, but maybe also have audio to go along with it too. And that would really help your ELL speakers, your English language learners, along with that process as well. Next up, you got positive behavioral support systems and positive behavioral interventions and supports. So the support system themselves, these are basically you want to reinforce positive behavior as much as you can and try to avoid negative consequences. You can have negative consequences, but you want to sort of focus on the positive first and then worry about the consequences second, right? And so you really want to be saying like, look, you see somebody doing a good job, you want to congratulate them for that, right? So it's really just a fancy term for what people already do in the field of education, right? Because if you see a student doing good, you want to congratulate them, right? You want to see their day made, right? And so this is the type of system that everybody uses for behavior nowadays throughout the whole country. Now, almost nobody does not use a positive behavioral support system or positive behavioral interventions and supports. Very rare that they don't. But in the event that they don't, you will be made aware of that. Otherwise, always look for PBIS all the time. And there's going to be positive reinforcements, negative reinforcements, but really just an uplifting community. Very uplifting vibe when you got positive behavioral interventions and supports. And one of the things that they're really going to focus on with this is restorative approaches to behavior, right? And so behavior, like the goal is not really to punish students, right? The goal of behavior is to see it that they don't repeat that same antisocial behavior again, right? That's the goal of effective behavior management, right? And that's what the PBIS tries to do, right? It's not like you're punishing somebody simply because they did something, right? It's like maybe you do, right? But that's not the way to think about it. The reason that they're having, quote unquote punishment, right? As much as a punishment, like detention, for example, is because you don't want them to repeat that same instance again. And maybe they don't do detention. Maybe they do some type of community service. That would probably be like the best thing, right? So instead of doing like sitting there in a room, maybe they're cleaning up around the school, right? Helping a custodian, for example. But these are different things that you can or cannot do. Different schools have different practices. Maybe you have that. Maybe you don't have that. Every school is different, but it's something you really got to take into consideration, right? Restorative approach. How can you make sure that behavior is not done again? And punishment should be almost an afterthought. So
the library will be closing in 15 minutes.
Here we go.
All computers, copiers, self-checkout.
We got a little announcement here.
Will shut down in 10 minutes. If you need to check out materials,
let's see.
Or pay a fine, please come to the circulation desk now. Thank you.
Sweet. Well, we only got a few minutes left, so anyways, we'll wrap this on up here. Try to go fast towards the end to get everything in. And the time for this nice reserved room is pretty much over. So Education 101, if there's any comments or questions in the comments down below, I will be sure to answer them. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you did enjoy this. We will get more in depth with some of these more interesting things. But again, this was just a brief overview of things, right? This is something that you got to know these terms, right? You got to know these positions, right? And once you know that, the rest will come very smooth, right? And you just have to have a surface level understanding of these things going into the coming weeks, because we will talk about these more in depth, and we will talk about certain things, but some of these things we're going to leave, to the for you to just learn yourself, right? So, for example, what more entails a resource officer? Well, we're not really going to talk about resource officers anymore, right? But it is something that you had to know. Like, what do they do in the school, right? For example, we will talk about pretty much most of these things, but we might not talk about absolutely everything. So, for example, maybe like gifted program or mission statements, right? Like, we're not really going to talk about mission statements going forward, right? But we will talk about, things such as, a 504 plan, right? Or accommodations, rubrics, assessment, lesson planning. And we'll go through all these different things. So if there's any questions, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Leave them down below. And, well, you can find me on social media at Ian Phillips USA. And I'll be sure to happily engage with you. And thank you very much for attending. This will be the first lecture. And we'll come back here hopefully in the next few days to a week and give you another one. So thank you very much for your time. And you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you.